Of course, it's prejudice, huh? You notice. I will do my best. Okay. The title I want, unfortunately, the image you will see there will be, the caption will be in French because I give it this morning to the French guides and I didn't have time to change them. But anyways, it doesn't matter. And so the problem is the following. I was working on the Riopelle recently, and I asked myself, how did he perceive the automatist movement? And he was part of it, for sure, for a while. But then, in 1951, in Paris, at the occasion of a show that wanted to confront the New York avant-garde and the Paris avant-garde, organized by the painter Georges Mathieu. I don't know if you see a little bit what he does. It's kind of big splash. He was making a painting in 2 minutes in front of the public and things like that. A little bit of showman. But anyway, he wanted to make an exhibition in which what is happening in New York and in Paris in 51, of course, then let's say the preeminence of New York school was not yet completely established, at least in the eyes of the French. New York, c'est bien, ma fin. And so they were seeing it a little bit from far. And so the title of the exhibition was Véhémence confrontée, so meaning that it's a confrontation between two schools that are wanted to have the shine. And he asked all the painters who collaborate to that to make a little text about their contribution. And amazingly, Riopelle wrote something. I said amazingly because there are very few texts by Riopelle. There's a lot of saying by Riopelle. Say that journalists will tell you, he said this and said that. I don't want abstraction. I'm not going out of nature, I'm going toward nature. Oh, okay, fantastic, Riopelle said that, and they quote like this. But then he writes a text, and in this text, he took some distance with automatism as it was practiced in Quebec. And if I just read you one phrase, you will see that indeed there is a kind of problem there. It says, automatism, which intended to be a total opening, okay, revealed itself finally like a restriction of chance. In French it says hasard, a restriction of chance. And because of that, became an ism, ISM, like Fauvism, Cubism, and Surrealism. And because of that, of course, should be overcome. So if automatism become a kind of just a current, a movement like the others, like Impressionism, Fauvism, and Cubism, and Surrealism, so it's about time to find something else. Huh? And so this was a kind of surprise to me that Riopelle in 51 take distance like this with automatism. And I wanted to know a little bit where it come from. And so I thought of proceeding in 3 sections today. First, let's go back to automatism, what it is exactly, what he wanted to achieve, and as a general movement, let's say, especially among the surrealists, and how it was applied in Quebec, let's say, at the time. The second part will be about Borduas, what he understood in it and what he kept from it and all that. And the third part, of course, Riopelle. Okay, so it's organized like a good vicar in his church giving a speech in 3 sections. What can I do? Okay, first, I'm sure that our Canadian automatists would have been very surprised to learn that the origin of the expression automatist writing, because that's the way it started, come from Spiritism, from people who were consulting spirits and having a Ouija table or whatever. It's really a bunch of strange people for our young atheist Canadian of the time. They would not have believed it easily. Anyway, but this is the first time we hear the expression automatist writing it in this type of milieu. And of course, what they imagine it is that this is, of course, a photo organized. It have not been photographed for real. So you see the medium with the lady sitting there. not looking at her paper, and having the spirit behind her that hold her hand and make her write whatever message coming from the spirits and something like that. And this was what they call automatic writing. After there was, the medium could read it and could tell you, well, your father is in heaven or he's in hell, or whatever a message that they wanted to hear. And of course, the spiritualist movement of the time explained that by the existence of the spirit. They were the people who were giving us message like this. And of course, when the surrealists read that, they laugh at it. This is ridiculous. There's no spirits and things like that. And they try, in the contrary, to explain it through psychoanalysis, for instance. There was an unconscious. And this message that the girl was writing was coming from the unconscious. Or even, this is like Freud would have explained it, but in France you had another psychologist who's called Pierre Janet. And he was speaking of subconscious. And among the surrealists, they like it better, as if you have two types of consciousness. You have one that I can speak to you and you can understand me, but under this, there's another ego, let's say, that can have his own needs and his own desire and all that, and it will be expressed, for instance, in dreams. Dreams will reveal the content of the subconscious. And for the surrealists, this was fantastic because that's probably there that the real poetry is. See? In the regular life, well, it's okay, but there's no poetry and all that. But under, you have the association of words that you never see before and all that. So they were very excited by this idea of a subconscious. So they explained the message given by the medium like this, like an affleurement, if you want, a kind of expression of the subconscious on paper like this. There was also some example of automatism painting, meaning that some medium, instead of writing, were making drawings. Like apparently this Fernand Desmoulins was able to draw at the speed of light anything, even with a bag on his eyes, not able to see what he was doing, and finishing with as realistic picture like this one, you know, that will represent a nun or something. And you see around her kind of probably started with these lines that goes, say, very, very freely. And then finally, when he got the feeling of it, could draw this type of things. André Breton, who is the founder, as you know, of the Surrealist movement, says that habitually drawings are more interesting than the writing, because the writing is, he says, is spoiled by their theory about the spirits and all that, and it's so boring and all that. He says, but the drawing, okay, could be fantastic, could be a kind of revelation of the subconscious again, but without this discourse around it, like you will find in automatic writing. So this is the origin of it, and so how to apply that, if you want, to surrealist poetry, because that's what they wanted to do with écriture automatique. They said, well, we'll not just repeat what the spirits were doing. We want to do something original with that. And so the main idea they conceived when they think how it works, it was that the message coming from the spirit was non-preconceived. That means that nobody had an idea of what will appear on the paper before doing it. It was completely unexpected, and it just appear, and then you can read it, you can interpret it after, but the first movement have to be non-planned, non-preconceived. And so Breton thought, okay, we can do that also. We can. And he says, he gives kind of the way to do it, you know. And he says, for instance, faites-vous apporter de quoi écrire. I laugh so much. He says, here is Breton, you see, in his office. Please, my dear fellow, bring me a pen and a paper. I will start to make écriture automatique. Faites-vous apporter quelque chose pour écrire. Alors, it settled in a place where you could concentrate your spirit as much as possible. Be as passive and receptive as you can. Also, this is important, of course, because the message will come. Forget about your talent and the talent of the others, your genius and all that. Know that literature is one of the worst places to go, and forget about all this. And write fast without any preconceived subject matter. So it's written by Breton as such, that write fast, meaning that you don't have time to control what's coming out, and without any preconceived idea before starting, and fast enough that you will not be tempted to read yourself. Meaning, say, if you stop, c'est pas bon, I don't like it, I will correct it. No correction, nothing. You just go like this as fast as you can. The first phrase will come naturally, because we have in our subconscious always a phrase who tend to pop out like this in the consciousness. The first one will come right away. The second one is more complicated because she was determined a little bit by what you wrote before. Because you wrote something. You may have some association of idea that will appear then. But he says, don't worry, go on fast. And if ever you are blocked somewhere, just write the letter L and puis continue. Especially in French, le, la, le, you could imagine that was the thing to do. Maybe in English, with T, with the, this or something like that. But this is the idea. Go. And then at the end, you could reread it and have a poem, Automatism. I will show you an example of the result. Okay? Now, this is a part of a poem, if you can, because there's no verse really and all that, written by Breton with the system of écriture automatique. And the first phrase, okay, dans la craie de l'école, la craie c'est the chalk of the school, there is a sewing machine. So this is the type of absurd phrase that will come like this from your subconscious, an association with a sewing machine and a chalk that probably linked to his childhood, I don't know what. He saw his mother and then went to school. Whatever the explanation you can give, but this is the type of the surrealist metaphor that they like so much. Because habitually in poetry, we proceed by comparison. You will see tears are like a little brook or whatever. But there's no comparison there. The chalk doesn't look like the sewing machine. It's a rapprochement between two realities that are very far apart in nature that you bring together and create a surprise, creating something that unseen and different. And then the second phrase, like he says, is a little bit determined by the first one. Les petits-enfants secouent leur boucle de papier argenté. Alors suddenly, they're small children. We are in a school. We are near the mother, also with a sewing machine. So, les petits-enfants, it's not completely pop out from nothing. There is an association of idea, the possible, and more with the phrase after, le ciel est un tableau noir. The sky is a blackboard that will be sinistrally erased by the wind minute by minute or something like that. So you see how this type of text was a good example, I think, of automatist writing. And Poisson Soluble is page after page after page of that stuff. Very, very difficult to read in a way because you scattered your brain in every direction. But on the other hand, you have all this kind of spontaneous poetry, which is not learned, who just come from inside like this, one after the other. And with time, Breton became more critical about écriture automatique because he says that people will imitate the effect of automatist writing. If I remember I had this problem once. I was with my class at school, at the university, and I wanted the students to make an experience of automatist writing. So I read them what I wrote to you, and I give the example, and I distribute paper to everybody. And then gather the paper and says, wow, hey, there are 50, I will have poems after poem. What are you doing here? It's so boring. I don't understand what he means. I realized that was not the place to make écriture automatique. Apportez-moi ce papier. No. That was not the right condition, and so it was terrible. I said, never do that again. It's fini. I thought it was very pedagogical. You know, they will make an experiment. No, ça n'a pas marché. Okay. Alors, what happened also, or this kind of resistance to it, or also imitation. Say, Breton says that the people begin to imitate it and they don't really participate to it. And so he became more critical about it, which is not completely astonishing. When he spoke of it in the manifesto of 1928 that I quote before. He spoke of it in a text that Borduas could read. And it's chapter 5 of his book. It's called L'Amour Fou, a book by Breton. And this chapter 5 I have a subtitle, if you want, the Château Étoilé. It was published in a magazine which is called Minotaur, of which the École du Meuble, where Borduas was teaching then, was subscribing to. And it's there that he saw it, probably. Since it was signed by Breton, and it was interesting to read, he decided to read it, and he learned about, let's say, écriture automatique, and also about painting automatism from this text. Because, of course, when I explain écriture automatique, it's one problem, but how do you transpose that in painting? What happened then? Do you just scribble and then you organize your painting and all that? So he doesn't know. In the text of Breton suggests two sources possible to explain how you can transpose it in painting. The first one has come from ni plus ni moins Shakespeare. It's a passage of Hamlet in which you see Polonius and Hamlet having this little discussion. So I can read it, this at least in English, because it was written in English. Polonius said, "My lord, the queen will speak with you, and presently." Hamlet answered, "Do you see yonder cloud that almost is the shape of a camel?" So he changed the subject completely, but he pointed at clouds that have the shape of a camel. And Polonius is always a little bit afraid of Hamlet, for good reason. He will be killed by him. But he says, "By God, it's a camel indeed." Hamlet, "Me think it's like a weasel." On change complètement. We'd say we change at least of size. The weasel will be a little thing and the camel. And Polonius, always a little bit prudent, he said, "It is back like a weasel." See, you have the same type of curve and all that. Hamlet, "Or like a whale." You go to the other extreme. Polonius, "Very like a whale." Hamlet, "Then I will come to my mother now." Meaning that, okay, it's enough. Yeah, you make an old fool of yourself. I can do so. So this idea is interesting because you do have a kind of objective event. Let's say we are the clouds, who are stable. And depending of how many people are, or even depending of your mood, you can read something else in them. And for the painter, it would have been to try to find something like a cloud that will give you a kind of projection of your own feelings, of your own subjectivity, that will you be able after to copy in a painting. And that was what Breton was suggesting. Looking at clouds, at their form, and interpreting them will give you idea of to make a painting. I was looking for what I will show now for years, but we find everything on the webs. It is this comics of Peanuts where the three of them are looking at clouds, okay? And so Lucy says it's wonderful. We can stay all day there and look at the clouds and try to find what they mean. And Linus, of course, who's like the Hamlet of the show there, become to say, "Well, those clouds, to me, look like the map of the Honduras in the Caribbean." So very, very far-fetched type of interpretation. And you notice that Charlie Brown doesn't say a word. That cloud there is like the profile of Thomas Eakins. Thomas Eakins, a famous American artist of the 19th century. And finally, the best one, Linus says, here I see the stoning of St. Stephen on the place of Jerusalem. And they begin to elaborate about the clouds. And then Lucy says, and you, Charlie Brown, what do you see? Well, he says, I saw a donkey and a horse see, but I changed my mind. It's wonderful. But again, this is exactly the same idea. You have a kind of a stable type of spectacle, so les clouds, and you project according to your limitation, of course, like Charlie Brown see a donkey and a horse see, and Linus see the stoning of St. Stephen. But you project personal content in the same type of objective type of, and then the idea will be that from there you could create your own painting, you could project your own subconscious if you want in your painting, since you see something else than another one. This idea of finding clouds finding image in clouds is well attested. You have famous painters who have done this, like Mantegna, for instance. One of his famous painting of the Saint Sebastian with his arrows and all. But if you look on the corner on the left, on the top, that just enlarged nearby, you will see a man on a horse in the clouds, as painted by Mantegna. And exactly the same idea that you have in Peanuts, in a way, this thing. And there's a famous example also in Canadian painting, or Canadian drawing, if you want. It is a drawing of Ozias le Duc that's called Profil dans un nuage, the kind of profile in the clouds. And you can see a kind of old man, or maybe God, if you want, that appear in the clouds. And being Ozias le Duc, of course, this is important for Borduas, because they knew each other very well. More than that, this drawing used to belong to Riopelle. And now Riopelle is dead, but in the succession, it used to be in his collection. Yeah. And so that's the first idea. The other source, or the other authority, let's say, that was behind this idea of transposing automatist writing in painting was ni plus ni moins Leonardo da Vinci. And this would have surprised very much the surrealists and all that, because they could not give a damn of Leonardo da Vinci. It's so far in the Renaissance and all that, and they were not thinking of it. And the one who mentioned that is, again, André Breton. He's the first one who saw in what we call the treatise of painting by Leonardo. What it was, in fact, it was notes that Leonardo took, and with the intention of creating a kind of real treatise in which it will be well organized, but in fact he never finished it. And so sometimes you hear about les carnets de Leonardo, meaning just some copybooks in which he has some notes like that. In these things, Breton knew about them, and he writes this about the possibility of painting from what Leonardo wrote. He says, the lesson of Leonardo, encouraging his pupil to copy, that's an important word, to copy their painting on what they could see, very well coordinated and proper to each one, exactly like the clouds, let's say, very well coordinated, but subjectively different from one to the other, by looking for long to an old wall, has not been often well understood. Okay, the idea, it is now that you don't look at clouds, you look at an whole wall with cracks and with spots and all that, and by concentrating on this image, we suddenly see, like in the clouds, things appearing that you just have to copy to make your painting. The word copy, of course, suppose that you are very passive about what you see. You just, after a certain while, certain pattern or certain image will impose themselves, and you just have, if you know how to draw, if you know how to paint, you can just copy it, and you will make, he says, a new painting that have never been seen before, that will be very personal, and also quite objective, because you can represent it if you want. And everybody among the surrealists, and even Borduas, was very intrigued by that. Borduas went as far as to buy, I find it in his library, in his personal library, so I'm sure that he read it, an edition by Joséphin Péladan. Péladan was a kind of oddball a little bit, but he was interested in art, and he's the founder of the Rose-Croix movement. I never know exactly what it is, but he's, for me, this is, don't touch it with one of the people, one of the poles, but anyway, I don't want to insult anybody. He was interested in that, and he published Les Carnets de Léonard in French in 1905, and it was republished, and Borduas bought a copy of that and have it in his library and could read, because, okay, Breton was mentioning that, La Leçon de Léonard, but he wanted to read it in the text of Léonard as such, you know, that what he says. Huh? And indeed, you can find in the text of Léonard, say a description of this, looking at old wall and getting ideas from it. I will just read you a translation. You will see a new device for consideration, which, although it may appear trivial and almost ludicrous, is nevertheless of great utility in arousing the mind to various inventions. You should look at certain walls stained with damp or at stone of an uneven color. If you have to invent some background, you will be able to see in these the likeness of divine landscapes adorned with mountains, ruins, rocks, woods, great plains, hills, and valleys in great variety. And then again, you will see there battle of strange figure in violent action, expression of faces and clothes, an infinity of things which you will be able to reduce to their complete and proper form. In such wall, the same things happen as in the sound of bells. In whose stroke you may find name, word that you can imagine. See? Alors, so it's a description of a technique. Là, huh? You look at the whole wall attentively for a long time, and you see all these association of landscape and everything that could appear, and you just have to take your inspiration from them, and then you will do something that nobody did before. Huh? So that was striking, of course, for Borduas. And we know that he read it because he quoted almost, not word to word, but certainly from memory, in the first lecture he gave in 1942 to a group of people who was called La Société d'études et conférences. Okay. They were inviting like this painters or art critics and everything to give lecture to this group of people. And Borduas was invited. He was very shy and very unsure in front of these nice bourgeois people. And we know, for instance, that the preparation of this lecture took him immense time. It's one of the longest texts of Borduas, with full of scratching, and say that he wanted to be sure to really impress these people. And he quote toward the end the whole wall of Léonard. So that means that's why I think he really. He says Dali and some younger painter still experiment with the paranoiac screen, an invention of Leonardo da Vinci, who, when asked by one of his people what subject he should paint, said, "Go to an old stone wall, look at it closely for a long time, and little by little you will see beings and objects appearing in it. You will discover in this way a very personal subject for your painting." Yeah? So it's exactly what Leonardo was saying, meaning that it's a proof also that already in 42, Borduas have read that and have been excited by this idea. The only word that was complicated there is to copy your. Some painters don't like to copy. They like to invent. They like to make their own things. And especially that Breton, who seems to say, okay, painting, it's just copying things. Breton refused that for the poet. He says the poet don't copy their ideas. The writing, they create the idea. So the painter said, why not us? Why we should not do the same? Create our own old wall, using our painting as a wall and spotting them with whatever we want, and then creating from that. See? Not to be passive, but to be active in the process. And the first example of that that I give you, it's probably with, I tried to find among the surrealists in France and the surrealist movement, people who refer also to the Leonardo advice directly. And one who does it is Max Ernst. You know the painting of Max Ernst. And Ernst tells a story that when he was a child, in his the front of his bed was done in wood with a lot of vein, if you want, and he says it was like a screen on which I could project my mind and having wake dream, if you want, say by looking at that. And he says later in my life I was once in a kind of inn near the sea, and the floor of the inn was in wood, and it had been scrubbed so many times that all the veins of the wood were apparent, and that's qu'est-ce qui est arrivé ici? Ouais. That's the hand of Max Ernst here that you see, that he make a demonstration of what he called the frottage, rubbing, if you want. The rubbing is used by archaeologists when they have difficulty to photograph, let's say, an inscription. They could put a paper, and then with a pencil, they will scratch like this, and they will get at least an idea of the inscription. That's what he's doing there. You see the board on which, and the paper above it, and with a pencil or whatever, he is getting some picture like that. And in a way, okay, he was working on a floor instead of a wall, but we are not too far. And he was not interpreting, just taking from the floor an image that he could do after. But right away, what Ernst did with that was collage. That means he collected from the floor different images like this that he could reassemble after in a kind of picture. Like, for instance, here, you see the two boards on each side, and then he put the frottage of a leaf in the middle. So he became active, if you want. The first part was passive, just to collect things, and now to be able to compose them in kind of collage. And so, to my mind, this is one of the closest thing that come to the idea expressed by Leonardo. Maybe no other painter tried to do it, really. See? They all will be excited by the idea of creating their own wall, but just to follow the advice as it is, you don't find any example of that. Gombrich, who is a famous art historian, asked himself, could we find even in Leonardo painting example of him using his own advice? Or he's just a big talker and never do what I tell you, but don't do what I do, or something like that. And he says there's only example I can think about Leonardo using a little bit similar project. It is in a different context. Leonardo, at a certain moment, always in this traité de la peinture, the same little traité that he dreamt to do, to try to convince his contemporary how to draw, not like they were doing in a medieval time, where they were trying to draw in perfection right away. See? And for instance, the famous example of that, it is this little copybook done by Villard-Honcourt. Villard-Honcourt was an architect, and he created a little textbook like this, in which he says, I could teach you to make perfect figure through geometry. And that's why you see triangles, stars, and rectangle associated like that. And from there, you can trace a perfect visage, let's say, or a perfect animal, like this for the first time, without hesitation. It was like a technique to create a perfect drawing right away, not to look for it and all that. And Leonardo says this is a terrible way to do drawings, because he says, he compared it to poetry. He says when a poet writes, he doesn't write in calligraphy. He will write as it comes. He will cross out a few words. He will hesitate. He will redo it and all that. He says, why we don't do that also in our drawings? And indeed, the drawings of Leonardo, in comparison to Honnocourt, are very hesitating. Some people are naked, others are already dressed and all that. It's a kind of scene that would have been the adoration of the shepherd, which is a kind of a subject, a religious subject that could go in a church. And all this hesitation was encouraged by Leonardo, saying, no, we create like the poet do. We hesitate, we are able to cross out some aspect that we don't like, and finally we get a perfect picture, but not right away with the geometry of a star or a rectangle like Conocourt was proposing. Huh? And it is in that context that he brings again this idea of the whole wall. Huh? Meaning that his drawings become like the whole wall. This is a very important intuition, of course, because then it is the artist who creates his wall. It is him that. So from my own drawings, I could find other ideas, I could find others' interpretation and create exactly like I says that if you look at an old wall, you will have the landscape and everything. And he had an immense influence also on painter of his time, like Raphael, for instance, who began to draw the same way also. It's not the perfect line, but looking from one line to the other, what will be the perfect form, or like he says, the movement, the expression, and all that. It's not given right away. It's a thing that you could work on it slowly, and then suddenly have an image. In certain case, Leonardo drawings are so packed with repetition and that are almost unreadable. Like for instance, on the left, you have a picture that it's almost impossible to read. If you turn the page, you find a little bit what it was all about. And it is, of course, one of the preparatory drawing of the famous Saint Anne, the Virgin, and Jesus Christ, the famous painting of the Louvre that have been restored recently. With great qualms among the restorer all over the world. What do we do with this? Don't touch Leonardo and everything. But it was done very recently, and probably successfully, because we know more now than before. And he was preparing this type of drawing. We know also other drawings by Leonardo that seems at first have nothing to do with the subject matter, but it's a little bit like a possibility from there you could go to the Saint Anne. Why? You have 2, 3 elements on the same person. Like in the Saint Anne, you have the Virgin sitting on the knees of the Saint Anne and holding a child. Now they are holding a cat, but it's an idea that could be elaborated and finished in the different painting. That was the intuition of Leonardo, according to Gombrich. I think it makes sense that when the real transposition of the idea of the whole wall is to use your own drawing, to use your own art as the point de départ, let's say, of whatever you want to create after. So that's certainly for an art. It's the second mention of the whole wall in the writing of Leonardo. There's a third one, which will excite also very much the surrealists and Borduas. It is about, ni plus ni moins que Sandro Botticelli. And Leonardo tells a story about him. He says, in this treatise, I just summarize. In this treatise, there is a fascinating echo of a conversation he must have had with Botticelli on the need of the artist to be universal and to know the structure of all things he may have to include in painting. Our Botticelli has maintained that such a study was unnecessary because by merely throwing a sponge full of paint at the wall, it leaves a blot where you can see a fine landscape. Ha! That's incroyable. Alors Botticelli says that, landscape, we don't need that. Leonardo da Vinci says, you have to be a universal painter, you have to know how to paint everything. Landscape, trees, and everything, and it has to be as realistic as possible and all that. And Botticelli, I don't give it. Obviously, he's more interested by the girls and the personage than the landscape, who is very minimal here. And then Leonardo says, he did a lot of wretched landscapes. Speaking of Botticelli, I understand. But the idea of throwing a sponge on the wall to create a landscape, this is, again, one of this active reaction. Instead of being passive, you just throw, you make your spot, and from there you can build whatever you want. This, of course, is not an invention of Botticelli himself, because you find in antiquity example of throwing of sponges like this. And habitually, the situation is the following. It is, for instance, Protogenos wanted to paint a dog and running with a hunter. And he wanted to make a spume, how do you say, écume? Foam. Well, foam bubbles from the mouth. And he tried with his brushes and then with different color and all that. And nothing, it was unnatural, it was not beautiful. So at the end, he got angry and threw his sponge on the painting, and marvel, of course, the little bubble were perfect and all that. So you have these stories in the tradition, and I think Botticelli just invented one in this discussion with Leonardo. Huh? And the same with horses anyway. They have as many as you want. Borduas knew the story of the sponge also. And we know it because he raconted that he was with Josephine Ann Bilton, which was a writer who wrote few articles on him. And they were walking in the street of Montreal, he says. And he says to her, maybe you heard of the advice that Leonardo da Vinci used to give to his pupils. He told them that a sponge soaked with color thrown on a wall left spots similar to a landscape, and that the whole range of picture could be seen through these spots: heads, animal, battle scene, rock, forest, and whatever. He makes confusion between Botticelli and Leonardo. Huh? But maybe they are on the street, he doesn't remember, he just quote from memory, but he makes the confusion. The thing comes from Botticelli, not from Leonardo. But again, the painter are interested by that because, again, it's an intervention, it's active, it's not just copying vision, it's doing something in which you could construct after a painting, from which you could construct a painting. And the surrealists will understand it that way also. Say, for instance, I was showing you Marc's before. This is another example of the same series in which you see the boards in the back of the picture. But what is in front is a collage completely imaginary, have nothing to do with looking at an old wall or something like that. In the contrary, it's an invention of Marc. Another surrealist painter who will be tempted also to make his own wall is André Masson. André Masson, you have this painting. If you go to the MoMA, I always like to see it. It's a small little thing. It's not a big painting. And it's called Peinture Figure. And Masson says that he knew about the story of the whole wall and all that, but he says, in my case, I made a whole wall. So I make a preparation of my painting that way. I had a canvas, and on the canvas, I put some glue, and then with sands, I obtained this kind of shapes, the gray shape that you see in the back there. And after that, being a Frenchman and having some culinary expertise, he used this kind of, it's a kind of cone with which you put some stuff in it, and you could have a line like this. And the red line there and the blue line are done with this technique, but instead of using cream or whatever, it was using painting. And so if you want, the wall was done by this collage of this kind of glue plus sands, and then the painting itself was drawn like this above it. And this is, and he says very bluntly that Leonardo da Vinci convinced me to make my own wall, to do my own. Another third example of that, it is what we call decalcomania. Decalcomania, I present you an example of that by Oscar Dominguez. He's the guy who is credited to have invented that in the surrealist group. Was a man from living from outside of France, but moving to Paris in the early 30s and then meeting Breton and Éluard and getting associated with the surrealist group. And what he thought of decalcomania was a technique that was already used for commerce, if you want. Basically, it is that you have a drawing made on a paper, let's say, that is fresh, and above it you put another sheet of paper. Say, for instance, I suppose I take a paper and I put it above it, and then I press like this, and when I pull it, I have the same thing on the other side. Okay? But if you do like Dominguez, you don't use a stupid drawing like this one, but you just put some spot of gouache in black, in blue and red, here and there, and then press both of them together. And when he lifted, he got this incredible landscape, you know, that you could not even predict what it was. See? And so Breton was very enthusiastic of this decalcomania system, and he says it is the whole wall of Leonardo da Vinci in a new garb, if you want. See? It's a new way to do it. Huh? What is important about decalcomania also, you will see that's very important in the development of Riopelle also, but what is important it is that you get spot. You don't get lines. Huh? You start with spot of colors like this, and you could build as many landscape as you want. Some painters have kept both, say the verso and the recto, and make two paintings with one, if you want. See? Tanguy did that, for instance. And this third system, in which you could say it's a kind of transposition also of the idea of the whole wall, but always with the insistence of the active participation of the painter and not just copying what is it. What about Borduas now? If you look at the gouache of Borduas of 1942, at first, it's not clear what is the relation with what we just mentioned before. But you have to imagine the following process. He starts with a white sheet of paper, and then he takes a charcoal. What you see in white here on the picture is, in fact, the actual, not a canvas, but it's a paper because it's a gouache. And it's not painted, if you want. And you could see, when you see the real thing, you could see that he used a charcoal to make lines on this. And the lines are, in fact, like the crack of the whole wall, as if the sheet of paper become like a wall. And the first line will be completely free without any preconceived idea, of course. And then the second one will be a little bit more determined. And I think more or less you could see here the lines will accompany the frame, the fact that it's a kind of frame. And at the end, when everything is finished, he could give it a title. He called it number 1, or the sewing machine, la machine à coudre. Okay? You need a little bit of imagination, of course, to see it, but let's see on the left, you will have the needle. You have to think of not a machine à coudre of today, but an old one, a good old singer like my mother used to have with la pédale, tchac, 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 on entendait ça. And, okay, this type of device, if you want. And then you will have the wheel on the other side. Anyway, well, it's not evident, but it's... what is important, it is, Borduas didn't say, I will make a machine à coudre. Huh? The machine à coudre is an interpretation after the painting is finished. And sometimes it's a good title, sometimes very weird, we don't see much the connection. Sometimes even some titles were given by somebody else than Borduas. Okay? For instance, Monsieur Laugier saw a kind of shape of a rooster in one of the paintings of Borduas done at the same time, and we call it Chanteclair, with the title of a Rostand play in which there was roosters and hens and things like that. Alors, and in fact, if you think of the way Borduas proceeded, he started with the drawing, and then when the drawing was finished, he painted it in color. The color came in a kind of second position. And he says the first colors he chooses completely at random. I don't care, anyone. And then, of course, this color will determine the second one. I will want to make an harmony. For instance, if you start here with gray, you will have maybe think of red after, and red will bring yellow. And so he will construct the color exactly like he did for the drawing, without preconceived idea. And at the end, he will detach sometimes some form with this kind of black things that you see around some shape, like to detach a little bit and to create this machine à coudre finally. And But the first phase looks a little bit like what André Masson was doing also. Masson was starting also with a piece of paper dans une série of dessins automatiques that he made in around 1920, and draw a line, and then this line bring another one. And in Masson, very often, toward the end, you get shapes that you could read. Maybe you can see it. There's some hands there. Est-ce que vous les voyez? Well,
yes, I see them.
Yeah, you see? Here you have another one with the breast, probably, because it's a little bit obsessed. And here. Huh? And so he starts with a free line, but if some figuration appear, he let it go. Huh? He had done also with color, but not like Borduas. Borduas make really the dichotomy between drawings and color, like you used to do in the academy. You remember that École des Beaux-Arts and things like that, drawing, but yeah, no, a little bit of color. See, that was the big system, let's say, of academic painting in which you control the drawing, because the drawing means the subject matter, it means the content, and the color is just to make it more pretty and all that you come at the end. So in a way, the gouache maintained this type of dichotomy between both. Huh? And Masson did also, but not like Borduas. See? This is another Masson picture in which you have sands also glued on the canvas, and then some color, a little bit of blue and red and yellow. And the shape, of course, of fishes, and that's why you call it combat de poisson, en tout cas, that you could may say it's close to, let's say, some system of what Borduas was doing. Maybe not too much by knowing about Masson, but having the same type of process, let's say, to do this automatism painting. I want to develop more about Borduas. I wanted to just make a kind of parallel between this type of painting and how the group of the automatists was created. There is always discussion about how a society starts. And if you read the philosopher of the past of the 17th, 18th century, for instance, Hobbes was thinking that in a period of nature, let's say, where man was completely free, it was horrible because people were fighting all the time and stealing each other and all that. And at a certain moment, they said, enough is enough, we will make a contract. And Hobbes is a contractualist in that sense. That means that society starts with people sitting around the table, signing a contract between I will respect your property, you respect mine, and then we will have peace and it will work better. And I was asking myself, did the group of automatists start like this? Not at all. You can imagine. I don't see Borduas with Riopelle on each side of the table making a contract. I will respect your style and you will respect mine, or whatever. No. In a way, the other model of non-contractualist was the family model. And David Hume, another philosopher at about the same time, defended that. He says society starts with family, and family expanding. And instead of having contracts, they have convention together. In the family, you have convention. We will have dinner all together. You will not look at TV more than 2 hours. We create little rules like this that are agreed on inside of the family, but have nothing to do with the rest of the society. No, each one has his own rules, but see, you make that's what you call, instead of contract, convention. And among the automatists, I'm sure you have the same thing also. They were having some habits, like, for instance, visiting the studio of Borduas every Tuesday, having discussion with him, and then also having what they call collective holidays. And during the summer, they were renting a chalet, let's say, in Saint-Hilaire or near any place, and having a reunion there, the group meeting together there and discussing endlessly about everything. And so these were like convention of a family. And it didn't struck me before, but thinking of that, this famous photo done by Maurice Perron of the exhibition of the group of automatists done in 75 West Sherbrooke, which was the house of Madame Gauvreau and Monsieur Gauvreau, of course, but Monsieur Gauvreau is never in the picture. He's a military man and he's always far and all that. And if you look at the group, okay, if you start from the left, you have a lady sitting in her armchair with Madame Gauvreau. Since the exhibition happens in her place, normally she could be there. Huh? And around her, the two boys that are, say, Claude Gauvreau and Pierre Gauvreau. So that means there are two sons. Huh? Claude is the poet and Pierre is the painter, and they are there. Sitting with glasses is Marcel Barbeau, another of the group. Behind her, he have Madeleine Arbour, which one of the girls who were with the group. Borduas with his little cigarette all the time, but it kills him. But anyway, he was under his big painting, which is called Sous le vent de l'île, the Leeward Highland, who is at the National Gallery now. So it's one of the big pieces that they have there. To have traveled all over the place and very, very important painting. Then if you continue, you have Mimi Lalonde. Okay, she's less known. She's a musician, but she was with the group. Finally, Bruno Cormier, the famous psychoanalyst, and Mousseau, and Jean-Paul Mousseau on the corner, young guy in the group. But what struck me there is you have a mother and a father there. You have a family. Yeah? You have Madame Gauvreau, who played the role of the mother. She's received them at her place. And Borduas is, of course, the leader, is there. Another thing that is less known, it is the first exhibition of the Automatism, who was done the year before, in 46, on Hammer Street, was done in a local giving to which the Automatism had access through the influence of Madame Gauvreau. What it was, Madame Gauvreau, during the war, have created a corps of ladies who helped the soldier and helped the effort de guerre, if you want. And she was making her meeting in this place. Huh? And she says to Claude and to others that if you want to make an exhibition, it's empty, please. In 46, of course, the war was over. And so the local was empty. And again, she's involved there. In the first exhibition of the Automatist, it's a photo done this time by Jean-Paul Mousseau himself, that you see three of his drawing in the back, let's say near the chevalet, near the easel there on the wall. And what is remarkable also that each painting are not grouped by artists. For instance, the painting of Borduas is among the others, like if it was not special. See, they are very equally represented, each one with different type of things. Again, so this type of family. Third example, Borduas says in a text that he wrote just for the group at a certain moment in 1950, ça s'appelle Communication intime à mes chers amis. He wrote about Riopelle making a nasty remark about the fact that he was too fatherly. Borduas. Riopelle said that about Borduas. Paternel, you are too paternel. And Borduas says, yes, I will like even that you don't say I'm just a little paternel, but I'm beaucoup paternel. See, he says, if I've done something important, influencing some of his students, it is because of that feeling, because I had a kind of concern to them as if I was their father. Again, this family model that they pop out like this. And for the convention, the best example I have, it is the fact that they have these holidays together. For instance, here is one in which Riopelle is implied. He rented a chalet on Île Perrot, on Perrot Island, and so all the group could come there and discuss and having fun and all that. And you see them there. See, the guy on the chair on the foreground is Pierre Gauvreau. The girl that you see just behind him is Françoise L'Espérance, is the wife of Riopelle at the time. And then she's speaking with a guy of which we see only the hair, with Jean-Marie Lapointe, a famous poet. And then in the back it is Madeleine Arbour, and on the floor sitting is Riopelle himself. See? And so that was one of the convention of the group, I'm sure, say, to meet like this and to create new kind of milieu in which you could discuss everything, say religion, art, nationalism at the time, say with Duplessis and whatever. And so the structure of the group, in a way, look a little bit like the way they were doing painting. You start with complete spontaneity. The rules are established slowly by appartient, I would say. Suddenly somebody have an idea, we should have a chalet, and well, okay. And a little bit like the painting was developing also. It's a kind of, there's a kind of correspondence there was interesting. Okay. Third part of my speech, oh my God, you say, il n'y a pas fini. It's about Riopelle. How Riopelle fit in that, where he stands. And Riopelle started in a very, very bad way, in a way, as a painter, I mean. He was taught by a man who was called Henri Bisson. The ambition of Bisson was to, like he says, copy nature as it is. And not only copy nature, but copy reproduction of nature. So he was giving to his student image that he says, copy it as it is, don't interpret. And Riopelle says it was weird because after 6 months of this system, my painting looked exactly like his. So we cannot distinguish both. Meaning, this is important because meaning that the system of Bisson was destroying the subject, was destroying the painter, so his mind. Because if you end up by making something so banal and so undescriptive that you cannot distinguish one from the other, that means you don't exist anymore yourself. That's the way he started. Then in 1943, he entered in the École du Meuble, where, of course, one of his teachers was Borduas. And I always think, well, that must have been the liberation, you see, of this old system. Borduas was able to give him back his ego, to be yourself, don't copy things like that. I don't want your painting to look like mine. See? It doesn't seem that it went so fast and so easily, because Riopelle was very proud of his ability, to paint realistic painter and like that, and he resisted to Borduas. He says in his class, I was le provocateur. I was the one who I tried to put him down and to be nasty and all that. And Riopelle had a special talent of that. He was able to do it. And so it lasted a year, maybe more. According to Claude Gauvreau, who wrote about this, he says it took him 3 years to detach himself from the old system that he learned before. And then, of course, he was almost out of the École du Meuble. So the direct influence on this, on Riopelle, is not clear. And the direct influence of Borduas on Riopelle is not clear. The only stories that Borduas tells about Riopelle, without naming him, it is that once he says, I presented drawings of Matisse to the class, and Riopelle says it's badly drawn, so c'est terrible. The guy doesn't know how to draw. It's because of course he compared to his own ability. And Borduas tried to explain the line of Matisse, how it's subtle, not so easy to do. How a line of Matisse could create even the feeling of a volume of something in space. And then suddenly Riopelle says, Monsieur Borduas, it's the first time I see the volume in a drawing of Matisse. He kind of opening himself a little bit to this influence. We know that it's him because when Borduas tells the story in Projection Libérante, in a text that he wrote after Refus Global, he doesn't name him, but we know in an interview, Riopelle says to a journalist, imagine when I was young, I was not even able to see the volume in a Matisse drawing. So, clack, when I saw that, I said, I catch you, my dear, it's you. And then he says, the same pupil was, and then he tells another story. The other story it is that Borduas used to classify the drawing of a student according to their merit, according to him. So the more free, the more personnel were the first, and the more like Riopelle were at the back. And Riopelle was very mad about this. He said, come on, I draw much better than Barbeau and Mousseau. And these guys just make spot of color, and look, me. And Borduas tried to justify his classification. He said, this is more personal use. You just copy things that you know already. And then suddenly he says, I remarked that he made a personage, let's say, that instead of making a belly like this, he made a belly like the concave instead of convex. And Riopelle could not believe his eyes, that even if you want to be very realistic, sometimes even reality cheat you. Huh? Even reality, you have seen probably this, this device where you see a head of a rabbit with two ears, and that you could read as a duck or rabbit. Huh? And of course, no one nor the other reading is good. The two are possible. But meaning, even when you are very realistic, you could have this kind of hesitation on the meaning of the thing. Huh? So for Riopelle, this was a big blow. So I want to be realist. I want to be that everybody will recognize what I do in my painting and look at that. Even if I'm as close as possible to reality, there's an ambiguity in the reading of my picture. But that's all. That's all we know about Borduas and Riopelle discussing together and all that. After 46, the things began to change. Then Riopelle and Barbeau and Musso, the three of them, decided to make a little studio in a shed near where Barbeau used to live. Barbeau was the son of a grocer, and he made a little bit of money. And he found this shed in the lane, let's say, behind Saint-Hubert and Rester, in that region, a little bit north of Mont-Royal. And it was $10 a month and all that, so he paid for it. And he organized in this little space a studio where they could work, the three of them together, in peace. Musso told me that, okay, during the summer it was fantastic, it was hot, but he said we could wait. But during the winter, this place was very cold, he said. And so we have a little stove in a corner, and we put 3 circles on the floor. Near the stove, it was called zone torride, meaning that very hot zone. In the middle, tempéré. And a little bit further, arctique. They have these 3 things. He says even you saw ice on the wall, you know, the inside of that. But what he did there, they experimented a lot of things that will become the automatism painting, in fact, each one of them. For instance, Riopelle tell that we were each one involved in our problem. He says, Barbeau with his problem, Musso with that, and me with how to get money to paint. Why? Because his parents apparently were not very happy of the change in Riopelle's style. They like it when he was very realistic, when he went to Bisson and come with his poor image. And the parents were, oh, c'est bon, ça on reconnaît tout ça. They were enthusiastic about it. But then suddenly, when Riopelle became to be more free and more automatist and all that, they find it terrible. They says, what is this? You will never make money with this. It's terrible. And so Musso told me that at a certain point, they even tear his picture and threw it in the garbage. So then that's why Riopelle went with them, not to paint anymore at home because he will lose his work. And also, that's why he speaks of money because, of course, the father cut the stipends right away. If you do things like that, I will not encourage you. I will not pay a cent for that. So for him, really, the problem was the money. The other thing that happened also I will show you an example of one Riopelle painting done in this atelier de la Ruelle, comme il l'appelait. They are very rare, for instance, because since he was so poor, he was using kind of clothes of very cheap, say, for canvas instead, as cheap as possible. And on this, they were using commercial painting, like Sherwood Williams, let's say, or something. And of course, this have not been saved easily. So there are very few of these paintings of that period of 1945, let's say, done in the studio. This one belongs to Dr. Champlain-Charret, who is a big collector of Riopelle. And it's called Ontario 9 of December, but don't ask me why. It have nothing to do with Ontario, I'm sure. But Riopelle sometimes give this type of titles. Ah, peut-être, oui. Oui, ça se peut. Oui, ça se peut. Oui, l'atelier n'était pas là, mais why not? Or what I thought he made a trip. Say, for instance, you have here a big painting which is called Spain, quelque chose comme ça. But it's after, it's not a representation of Spain. It's after a trip in Spain that he painted that. And many of the paintings of Riopelle, of early Riopelle, are called painting or untitled. Most of them. And so he's not interested so much in getting content. But what is interesting here, it is the kind of freedom in comparison to what he was doing before. It's amazing. And another thing that he tells also, I'm less sure of that, but Riopelle is a wonderful liar for art historian. You know, he tells a story, and we work on this after for months and months to find out that he fooled us or whatever. He pretended that they were, the three of them were able to intervene in the painting of the other. They were, for instance, Musso will start a painting, will go home, and Riopelle would stay a little bit later and correct the painting of Musso. Oh boy, I know both of them. It will not last long, this type of thing. Musso will not have tolerated 1 minute, and nor Riopelle, I guess. But again, this idea of having two subjects in the same painting, and we know that Riopelle did that also with Françoise Espérance, of course. There's some painting that both of them created together. Again, if you think of this absence, complete absence of subjectivity in the beginning, now you have too much subjectivity in the same painting. You have two people intervening, as if he was trying to find the right balance. Be yourself. This is the only thing that you are asked to, not to add your input to the others and to make a kind of mishmash with this. In the contrary, trying to find your compass, but it was probably not so easy to do. One other experience that he did there, and that is very important for Riopelle, it is decalcomania. You remember I spoke a bit about Dominguez? You have, at that period, some decalcomania done by Riopelle. I will show you three of them. The first one is called Versombreuse. It's a poetic name that he invented. It has no meaning whatsoever. In which, instead of having two pages, like I explained before, see the one with little spots, he just fold it. And he got a very symmetrical type of image. And a little bit like a recherche, this kind of test. And of course, the apparition of a face, in a way. It looks like a mask or a face. And so that's one. There was another one. Symmetry is not the big, strong point for Riopelle. He doesn't like it. He wanted to be free of that. So instead of folding his he folded on the side like this. And if you look in that axis here, you see a personage. You see two legs, a body, and maybe a head, a yellow head on the top. Meaning that that could justify also the title. It's called Gitan. And Gitan is a... Wait, the body of the personage look like a guitar. I agree with you, but you could interpret also the two like legs, the two black lines like legs, and then in yellow maybe a hand like this on the side. See? No, there's a kind of personage, but the guitar is there. Okay, and then the third example is here at the museum. Decalcomanie numéro 1, 1946, in Museum of Fine Arts here, and in which on the left side he used probably a vertical folding to get this black arch that you have there. But on the other side, the green spot seems to be done on an oblique line. Mais this, if you think of it, that means that the painting now starts with spots and not with line, as if Riopelle was trying to detach himself from the system of Borduas with the first you draw the line and then you had the color. He starts with the color, he starts with the spots, and of course it's like, again, the whole wall if you want, but I don't want to repeat that all the time. To get this picture. The other element in decalcomania is so important, it is surprise. You don't know what will happen. You don't know exactly what will happen. You can control a little bit of it, but not completely. And for Riopelle, this was a very important element, to keep this awareness all the time of what I'm doing by having a surprise for what's done and then deciding what to do in the next step. And you will have two consequences of that, of this experience of decalcomania. First of all, like I said, the autonomy of paint, of color, if you want, and line. Both of them are belonging to two realms, different. You start with spots, and then you could have line who have a certain correspondence with a spot that you made, but can be completely free. You can have like two layers of signification. You could have this kind of network of line superposed to a series of spots that were done first. Like here, you see it a little bit. Sometimes the line seems to circle some spot, but sometimes they are quite free. They are just added there at another level. And he will continue in that direction even more with the beautiful aquarelle or ink like this one, in which you have the colors done first and then the line are added after. Exactly the opposite of the gouache of Borduas, where the line was first and the color after. See? Probably is done also in purpose a little bit just to make Borduas a little bit mad. Why not? The other problem that Riopelle will have very fast, it is like Borduas had also. After the gouache, what you do with oil? See? There's a big technical problem there because the gouache is a medium that dries very fast. You could paint, and also water have superficial tension much bigger than oil. And this, for instance, see, you have insects that can walk on water. If you put them on oil, they will sink. Oil have tendency to spread, not to stay in his limit, if you want. If you make a drop of water, it have a shape. It contain the water in a certain shape. It doesn't extend itself endlessly. Like, I don't know if you have this expression in English, to faire tache d'huile. Faire tache d'huile, that means you make a spot of oil, and then suddenly, after a while, the oil have spread out all over, and it's not kept in his... So when Borduas tried to paint in oil the same way that he was doing with a gouache, he had a problem because the color became to spread like this and blurred themselves together. He wanted to have a very neat line like he had in the gouache, and this didn't work. So that's why he changed the system completely. He says, no, we have to paint first the background, and then above the background we paint some objects that are suspended in midair like this. When the background is dried, then you can add something, and you will have now a dichotomy between background and object instead of drawing and color. When Riopelle had the same problem to transposing this aquarelle and this ink in oil painting, he didn't proceed like Borduas at all. What he did, it is to really annulate completely this idea of two layers. Now everything is packed in a kind of, say, what the American critic call flatness of the painting. And also by using very diluted type of painting, like you see here, you have this kind of drips going down from the top to the bottom and adding to this effect of surface, as if it's a stained surface. It's something that have no depth, no three dimension. Is really like a flat surface with this. And from there, it will develop more and more. See, for instance, another example of a beautiful painting was given by Bruno and Ruby Cormier. I don't know if some of you knew Ruby. She was a wonderful person. She died recently. 101, I think. So I just wish that to most of us. And Ruby and Cormier was a psychoanalyst, was a very important doctor also. He works with prisoners, very, very courageous guy, and he was also like I would say the doctor of the automatist. He was, they could consult him and all that. And Ruby, who was English speaking, was also teaching French. So there was a special people. They collected, of course, these things when they were $50 each because they knew this painter. And this one had been given by Le Couple Cormier in the Museum of Fine Arts here. What happened it's a kind of surface painting by Riopelle, and he will remark later that you find often in this type of painting, especially in black, this kind of shape, circular shape like this, as if the gesture of painting was leaving a trace in the painting itself. See? And this gesture, very naturally, will be like a little circle, if you want. And okay, for a moment, he's not too conscious of that. It happens in this painting. But when he will take conscious of this repetition, he will become too weighted. He says it's too easy. It's a thing I don't control, really. It's a thing that I should control, that I should know what's happening when I use gesture. Huh? And so you see it again. In 1949, Riopelle returned to France. And he had his first show at a gallery. It's called Ninado Cette. And this is the gallery where Véhémence Confrontée, of which I was speaking at the beginning of the lecture, was taking place also. So this is a gallery that he knew very well, because his first one-man show in Paris was done there. And this is one of the paintings that he presented at this show in Paris. Beginning of his fame, it's in this famous exhibition, if you want, that Breton wrote a preface for him. Because they met, and Borduas says, you go to Paris, please meet Breton and tell him how I admire him and all that. They wanted to be with the surrealists a little bit. And so Riopelle met Breton and all this, and it was okay. And Breton said, je vous écris une préface, so I will write you a little text. And it is in this text that Breton called Riopelle un trappeur supérieur. What is this Canadian coming in Paris, like he comes from the forests of Canada, and he's a trapper, and he invented that. And this was repeated. I remember when I make my thesis at the Sorbonne on Dubuffet, and I met Monsieur Dubuffet, of course, and all the shaking. And he says, Gagnon, qu'est-ce que vous faites en histoire de l'art? L'art canadien, Monsieur Dubuffet. Ah, l'art des trappeurs. Pas vraiment. I tried to explain. It was classified already. It's Canada, c'est les trappeurs. What can we do? The one who started that is Breton about Riopelle with this painting. And after that, there's a big change. From 1949, Riopelle will get rid of brushes and will use what we call a painting knife, a spatula. Palette knife. Palette knife. Alors, this is one of the early paintings done with this, but with a superposition of line after. I will explain that after. But let's see, if you look at the background here, you will see these little strokes that you get with the palette knife. Think of it. A palette knife is a good example of what decalcomania would suggest. Why? Because how do you use this instrument? You put your painting, your pigment on the canvas, and then you cover it with your spatula, and then you make like this, you slide it, and you get some color. But there's a moment where you hide what is below. By the very shape of the spatula, you cannot see what is under. Like the decalcomania, hiding the picture before you open it, and you have the same surprise. So I think there's a connection there is very important. Since after that he will work with palette knife all his life, except at the end with the spray. For a long time, that will be the only instrument that he will use. Okay, above this, when the background is done, he have these white lines that was projected on the canvas. Very often people make comparisons with Jackson Pollock because of that. But Pollock used to work on the floor. The painting is on the floor. And Riopelle worked vertically on an easel most of the time. The other thing also that this is a kind of natural development of Riopelle when you think of the watercolor that I was showing you before, in which first you get the spots and above them you have this network of lines. So for him it was a kind of natural development, and he felt that this comparison with Pollock were not nice to him. They were not just, in fact, that he could have been spared from this comparison. And look at, then Riopelle became more and more sure of himself and created a beautiful painting who cost now millions of dollars because of the 50s. This is one of the great period, the so-called mosaic of Riopelle. And this is an example that was sold recently at Eiffel. And in which you have the two things, like you have the spot of color and also the lines above them. And it's then that we reach 1951, in which he presents his painting at Véhémence confrontée, what I was speaking before. And in that context, of course, he could say that the painting that I was making now are so detached from automatism that it have to be seen as a kind of different things. It's no more an ism, like he says, but something else. And the painting he presented at Véhémence confrontée is this painting. And it's a very strange thing for Riopelle because it doesn't look like much of his work before and after, but in which there's tons of pigment, let's say, have been put on a canvas, left it flow like this, and creating a kind of thick mess, I would say, in front of the public. It's a not too big painting, but very free and very different from what he did before and what he will do after. And it is in that context that the little text that I was reading to you become to make more and more sense. And you will see. He says the automatist who wanted to be a total opening was in fact a restriction of chance. And of course, in a painting like that, chance is not restricted. You have a lot of things that you cannot predict that will happen if you let the pigment just flow like this and all that. And what Riopelle was suggesting by this idea of, he speaks of hasard en français, mais chance, it is that chance is something of which you don't know the cause, in fact. You call it chance because you don't know the cause of it. There is cause. There is something that will create, say, a pattern and all that. But when you don't have control on it anymore, when you don't know what it will, from where it comes, you speak of hazard. Eh? I was painting, and suddenly I got this spot. I don't know from where it comes. I don't know, is it my unconscious? Is it this? Is it that? The cause of it is unclear. And when he speaks in the contrary, that the automatist, by using the same gesture, circular like this, now I find the cause. It says it is the hand. It is the way we paint that make this repetition in my painting of this little circle. So what we need is not a small chance like this that we could find a cause. We need to go much deeper in chance. Total chance, he will say, will be what saves painting. And I think this is what we see here. So in a way, it's a painting in which you cannot really know from where this color, this shape and all that come from. And as if you have to go further, see, in a kind of a realm in which the cause are unknown, that we cannot control them anymore. See? And by saying that, he says, then I detach myself from automatism. He says they were too attached to this idea of a gesture, of gestural painting, and repeating themselves endlessly and making an ism, making a kind of ism. And in a way, also, of course, Borduas wanted to fly by his own wings, to be free of any influence. I think also in terms of what I was explaining before between convention and contract, Riopelle took the way of contract. He went with galleries and make money. Anyway, that's the that's I wanted to tell you about the three three parts of my speech. What was automatism, how Borduas and the group interpreted it, and how Riopelle slowly detached himself. I don't say that he renounced of it right away and all that. In the contrary, it was a kind of a big assimilation, a big deliverance also of what he received before, and that could make him now one person and not two or three or nobody like he was before. Okay, so thank you.